Hello there, how you all doing? Say hello, Will.
Is Nickelodeon cooked?
Nicola, I'm going to say yeah. You have been for a long while. What would you say? Would you say yeah, no?
Yes.
Yes, definitely.
Because
Because of
this dude.
this dude here. Mr. Dan Snyder. But we're not talking about him today. That's probably a topic for another time. Although weirdly, the subject is kind of tied in.
Also, Russell Brand got exposed again.
Yeah, Russell Brand got arrested again. But this is, again, tied to what I'm going to talk about. I posted a video not so long back, which was a second part to one I posted even further back on the Deception Industrial Complex. And it was showing the gradual steps that the wider intelligence community, that being the CIA, MI6, or SIS as they are now, MI5, NSA, DIA, the DI over in the UK, which is the Defence Intelligence, which is a separate part of the military intelligence, GCHQ, NSA, NCSC, NSA, blah 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 blah. You get the idea. And it showed the gradual steps that they took to ensure that certain people weren't what?
People hate the Snow White remake.
Yeah, people hate the Snow White woke ideology. It showed the gradual steps to get rid of certain figures that were becoming popular, not just in the political world, but in the wider public sphere, and them taking them out in a gradual coup d'etat, you could say, the entire Western world. The first one was Dag Hammarskjöld, who was probably the last chance that the UN had, the last serious chance that the UN had of actually getting a lasting peace in most of the Middle East and most of the world. And he sadly died in a plane crash in the end of 1961, beginning of 1962. It was during Kennedy's term anyway, short term that he had. And then of course we also had, between that, the speech by Dwight D. Eisenhower talking about the military industrial complex, and then JFK, all his speeches leading up to his eventual assassination in November of 1963. That was when the coup happened, where the coup was complete. And what is now the Deception Industrial Complex essentially took control. The intelligence services of the world, mainly the US and UK intel agencies, took control of the corporate world and the academic world between those times. The amount of companies that are front or under the control of either current CIA or MI6 or former CIA and MI6 is astronomical, especially the larger companies. And these larger companies themselves, their largest shareholders are of course also CIA and MI6 front. And this is how they control everything, how they gain a great amount of their control. They also use Gladio. Now Gladio I've talked about a lot of times. It is now defunct, right? The actual program doesn't exist as it used to, but it's still in effect, pretty much. All Western governments have been captured by this program, which was an intelligence-led program, led by, as I said, the US and UK. All of the EU is captured by that. Australia, New Zealand, Canada, Britain, America, Israel. All of them are captured under this Gladio program, and quite a few of the other nations as well. There was an EU meeting before it became the EU Parliament. It became the EU Parliament not long after this came out. I have the minutes from that meeting, and it goes into the it was an EEC meeting, and it goes into the Gladio program and how it started off with the Italians being a bit concerned about Gladio having infiltrated their parliament, which they had. They'd gone from being stay-at-home brigades that were essentially terrorists to having actual power, actual say. And this is how they wormed their way in. Well, they didn't just do it in Italy, they did it all over Europe. And these minutes, they actually go through their concerns. Now, at the same time, there was also this. These are all the memos between the CIA, or reports to the CIA, between the CIA and various embassies in Europe and various European nations, as each one of them was getting very concerned about the Gladio thing coming out. Why? Because they were all involved. This led to a very strange sort of setup that we have nowadays, or the very strange setup that we have nowadays, and this is the fact that our governments don't control anything. It's our intelligence service and our intelligence agencies that control everything, and they're all under the umbrella of largely Five Eyes. What? Oh yeah,
I mean, that
plane.
Yeah, that plane looks like an asteroid.
Looks like an asteroid. Does a bit, I suppose, doesn't it?
Yeah, because that asteroid won't
Yeah,
hit.
it's absolutely clear.
Yeah, that asteroid won't hit until 2032.
No, probably. Well, it's not going to, they say. Anyway, Five Eyes was started just after World War II and incorporated the US, UK, Australia, Canada, and New Zealand. But it also drew in all of Europe as well, later on down the line, and now the EU, even further on down the line. They have offices everywhere, called sections. That's what they call them. Section houses that are all over Europe, all over the Western world. A lot of them run out of the how can I put it? The foreign aid divisions, which are essentially USAID in America, the Foreign Affairs and Commonwealth Office in the UK, and the Australian and New Zealand and Canadian equivalents. And it's their private secretaries in the UK that actually have control over the cabinet and over policy. And the same is true in the US. They're essentially the fronts for what has become a multinational, multi-ethnic and multi-intelligence agency blob, as Mike Benz likes to call it. He's not wrong.
Hey Dad,
Well,
we could walk over there.
you want to go that way? Okay.
Because what happened last time?
Oh yeah. I did my ankle in last time when we were doing this. So yeah, it's essentially become this wider blob, and it's these civil servants, as it were, that run the governments, run the parliaments, run the cabinets of the various Western nations, such as the UK. The last video I did on this, I ended with Dominic Cummings. What? I know the moon, yeah. Something Dominic Cummings said about these private secretaries scripting cabinet meetings, and I'm gonna do the same here, just with a little bit of a montage, not just Dominic Cummings, but evidence for this actually being the case, and we're all working as one, all these governments working as one under the same banner. Anyway, thanks for watching. Like, share,
Subscribe. You know the drill.
bye bye.
Of people in politics fundamentally prioritize social relations within the insider network. That is just what totally dominates their life, day in, day out, year in, year out. Now, in some ways, it's very odd, right? Because you think, what's the point of doing this for 30 years? And then you kind of become a minister, but you're not actually in charge of anything, and you can't actually do anything. And then you're spat out, and you're not even going to be a footnote in history. What on earth is the point of it? It kind of seems completely crazy. I think that misunderstands how they see it. For them, the theatre and appearing on TV is the critical part of it. It's not, have you actually done anything? So the most obvious way to think about it, right, is the cabinet. You have the most famous door in the world, number 10. Every week, these characters walk up the street, the cameras are all there, the ministers smile at the cameras, and they think, we're part of the insider gap. This is the peak thing that everyone aims at. Whilst behind the door, the people actually running most of the government regard the cabinet as just kind of bullshit theatre. The meetings are literally scripted. The whole thing is a complete Potemkin farce. Questions about what did the Foreign Secretary think, or what did the such and such Secretary think during 2019 on Brexit, for example? And the actual honest answer is, I don't really remember, because it just wasn't relevant. The person in the... So if you think of two roles, right? Foreign Secretary in Great Britain and the private secretary in the PM's office responsible for foreign affairs, an official whose name has never been in the newspapers. That person was like 10 times more powerful and important than the Secretary of State in meetings. They are literally scripted. So when the Prime Minister has a meeting with ministers, what happens is that before the Prime Minister has that meeting, officials go into the Prime Minister's study and they give him a folder. And in the folder at the front is a thing called Chairman's Notes. And that's the script, and that's what the Prime Minister reads out. And the conclusions for the meeting are in the Chairman's Notes, drafted before the meeting happens, right? So the Prime Minister says, hello, Secretary of State, blah, blah, blah. And then all these officials sit around the sides on chairs around the edge of the room. And then the MP, the Secretaries of State, all look down at their folders because they've all got their scripts, right? And this is why I use the NPC meme, right? Because then the Prime Minister reads out, well, we're here to discuss blah, blah, blah. And then he goes around the room, and then Secretary of State for Justice or the Foreign Secretary reads out his bullet points, and then he reads out their bullet points, and they read out. If anyone goes on script, you see the officials sort of go, and then look over at the other official on the side of the room and kind of go. That means we'll come back to that after the meeting and make sure that that doesn't happen. And then at the end, it was a fascinating, great discussion. Thank you so much for your wonderful, insightful, original contributions. And then he reads out the conclusions, which are all drafted in advance. And it sounds like a parody, but it is literally how the British state functions.
You've got to remember that Volodymyr Zelensky is not he's not an unreasonable guy. He got elected really as a peacenik. He was out there. 2019 he tried to do a deal with Putin. As far as I can remember, his basic problem was that the Ukrainian nationalists couldn't accept the compromise, and you can see why not.
The world judged the Iraqi regime was a dangerous aggressor. In the interests of world peace and regional security, the community of nations required Iraq to surrender its offensive arsenal, its chemical and biological weapons, and abandon its nuclear weapons program. Iraq agreed to comply.
The world judged the Iraqi regime to be a dangerous aggressor. In the interests of world peace and regional security, the community of nations expelled Iraq from Kuwait, required Iraq to surrender its offensive arsenal, chemical biological weapons, and to abandon its nuclear weapons program. Iraq agreed to comply. Iraq's continued defiance of the community of nations presents a challenge which must be addressed.
Presents a challenge which must be addressed. It is inherently dangerous
to allow a country such as
Iraq to retain weapons of mass destruction, particularly in the light of its past aggressive behaviour.
If the world community fails to disarm Iraq, we fear that other rogue states will be encouraged to believe that they too can have these weapons, these most deadly of weapons, to systematically apply international resolutions, and that the world will do nothing to stop it. That is the ultimate nightmare, which the world must take decisive and effective steps to prevent.
Possession of chemical, biological, or nuclear weapons by terrorists would constitute a direct, undeniable, and lethal threat, including to Canada Australia and its people. The world has tried for years other means, but so far to no avail. We cannot walk away from the threat that Iraq's continued possession of weapons of mass destruction constitutes to its region and to the wider world. In the final analysis, Mr. Speaker, the absolute conviction of the government is that disarming Iraq is necessary for the long-term security of the world and is therefore manifestly in the national interest of Australia.
In the final analysis, disarming Iraq is necessary for the long-term security of the world, to the collective interests of our historic allies, and therefore manifestly, Mr. Speaker, it is in the national interest of this country.
Necessary, rational end of rational men. I realize the pursuit of peace is not as dramatic as the pursuit of war, and frequently the words of the pursuers fall on deaf ears. But we have no more urgent task. Let us not be blind to our differences, but let us also direct attention to our common interests and the means by which those differences can be resolved. And if we cannot end now our differences, at least we can help make the world safe for diversity. For in the final analysis, our most basic common link is that we all inhabit this small planet. We all breathe the same air. We all cherish our children's futures, and we are all mortal. That is the most important topic on earth, peace. What kind of a peace do I mean, and what kind of a peace do we seek? Not a Pax Americana, enforced on the world by American weapons of war. Not the peace of the grave or the security of the slave. I am talking about genuine peace, the kind of peace that makes life on earth worth living, the kind that enables men and nations to grow and to hope and build a better life for their children. Not merely peace for Americans, but peace for all men and women. Not merely peace in our time, peace in all time.
And what is amazing, absolutely amazing, is that Khrushchev heard it, was carried away, summoned the U.S. envoy, Kennedy's envoy, to Moscow, Averell Harriman, and said, "This is the finest speech by an American president since FDR. I want to make peace with your president."